I'll just wait for the last few people to join us and then we'll get started. Who went to the Vegas party last night? Okay, it's good to see you made it this morning. First session in. Did you win anything? Oh, good. So you're in a good mood as well. It's excellent. Right, welcome to our session. It's maybe slightly renamed from what it was originally. When we started out putting this presentation together, I approached AUT, so we're working on a project with them, and said, this is such a cool project that we did on SharePoint 2013, deploying it into the Faculty of Business and Law, and also using records management because we have to be Public Records Act compliant, and said that we should present this. And Stephen and Shelley kindly volunteered from AUT to actually present with me, but they wanted me to come along and help kind of MC this kind of whole thing. So I'll kind of introduce the different topics that we're going to talk about, but actually Shelley and Stephen have all the information about the project and how it works. So you are hearing the story from the actual customer's perspective, rather than a vendor, because I work for Provoke. The idea behind this is that we've been approached by a number of different education organisations, as well as people that need to be Records Act compliant, and ask us about this project and how we did it. So what we did is we thought we'd just compile all the questions we've been getting, all the common questions. So this is more like a frequently asked questions presentation. So the way it's put together is basically we got a question, and then one of us is going to essentially take that question and answer it. There'll still be an opportunity at the end to ask your own questions, so keep those for the end, because we have some books to give away, courtesy of Michael Sampson, at the end for any really good questions. So right, to kick us off, just to introduce everyone, I'm the Owl from Provoke, Alan Marshall. I'm the architect consultant at Provoke. We have an animal theme at Provoke. We're called the Zoo. So we actually nominated some animals as well for both Shelley and Stephen. And I'll just let them introduce yourself. So Shelley.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Shelley Tarsili, the Technology and Resources Manager in the Faculty of Business and Law at AUT. As the business owner for the project, my role was to provide the project with a strong understanding of the business needs of the faculty and lead the faculty into the implementation of SharePoint.
And my name is Stephen McWilliams, and I'm the Information and Collaboration Architect at AUT. So my primary areas of responsibility are obviously information architecture, collaboration, but I also have a strong interest in end-user adoption and change management.
Thank you, guys. We also nominated them some animals. Shelley is a guinea pig, because essentially business and law was the guinea pig in this whole thing. And Stephen just likes trouts, I think. Yeah. We went through gooses, trouts, all sorts of things. Yeah. So we nominated some animals. Right, so let's kick into it. So just really, first thing is just some background. So everyone familiar with who AUT are? Yeah, okay. Shelley's just going to do a quick rundown on what it's like at AUT.
So AUT, oh that's very loud, is a large, complex organisation. It has a culture of being family friendly and a great place to work. A lot of decisions are made committee style, and it's largely decentralised in its approach to work. The Faculty of Business and Law is made up of 2 schools and employs around 250 people. The AUT Law School is New Zealand's newest law school. The AUT Business School is internationally accredited, and the Bachelor of Business is AUT's largest program, teaching approximately 6,000 students across its undergraduate and postgraduate qualifications. We have a strong centralised faculty model. For example, technology and resources management is overseen by me across the entire faculty, rather than at school or departmental level.
Thank you, Shelley. So one of the first things that any SharePoint project starts with is some sort of trigger. There's some reason why you'd want to deploy SharePoint. So these could be, there's some business goals or strategies that you have that SharePoint fits. In this case, there were some key drivers that were identified early on in the piece before even I came on board that pointed towards us needing to actually do something to solve these particular issues. And Stephen has some insight on these.
Sure. So the first key driver was storage. So each year ICT has to increase our storage capacity by around 50%. So if we extrapolate this rate of increase out, it is estimated by 2020 that it will cost AUT $28 million a year to store and manage our content. The second reason was that there's no university-wide record management system in place. So AUT is a group of quite siloed departments and faculties, and there's a duplication of content as well as some legacy content across the university. So not only was there a PRA requirement to put in place a record management solution for our digital content, there was also an information management need. The third driver was faculty communication. So previously faculty communication was sort of facilitated through traditional means of email, posters and staff meetings, etc. There was a staff engagement survey carried out last year which identified a need from within the faculty for two-way communication. And the last driver I'm going to talk about is information overload. An audit of the faculty's file share conducted at the end of 2013 revealed that the share contained, and this is just one faculty, 732,000 documents located in 68,000 folders, nested 18 levels deep. So with scenarios like this, it's no wonder that groups like IDC are sort of telling us that information workers have to spend about 30% of their week searching for content. And what about our deployment options? So initially this project was called a pilot, but in effect what we created was a prototype that we will roll out across the university. So one of the first decisions we had to make was where are we going to create this prototype? The first option was AUT University, but it was decided that this environment was too big, it was too complex, and that would probably be too risky. The second option was ICT services, but it was felt that the project should be driven by the business, as it isn't a typical ICT project. And the third was to run the prototype out through a faculty. And the main reason that we decided for this option was that the project would be a manageable size and that it would be business driven. So Shelley, can you tell us why the Faculty of Business and Law was chosen to run the prototype?
Sure. Due to our international accreditation requirements and our early work with compliance to the Public Records Act and information of our content, we were seen from the university's perspective to be in the best place to transition to a SharePoint environment. While the university will be classed as risk adverse, the faculty is renowned across the university as early adopters of change, particularly change delivered through technology, with a culture of putting our hands up first for any ICT project. We collaborated with the university's record manager and completed extensive work with our hard copy records. We had a strong base of understanding of compliance requirements. Through technology developments with our student management system, we were able to revisit our business processes for all our records pertaining to students. We had a centralised repository for all faculty content with a management structure of this in place. When the university first initiated discussions on deploying a SharePoint environment, a number of workshops were undertaken. We participated in all workshops and highlighted opportunities for putting into practice the functionality available. ICT and the records manager were aware of the progress we had made in the area of information and record management and quickly identified us, the Faculty of Business and Law, as the area for the prototype. It must be noted that a project of this scale and spend would normally be deployed in a central service team first, rather than a faculty. This is mainly because a faculty, by and large, employs academic staff rather than administrative staff, therefore have limited administrative support to undertake the work needed.
One of the key things out of this is that there's a lot of preparation that needs to be done. So even when we go to the next faculty, there are some background things that faculty is going to need to be thinking about before we actually start. So putting the background work in now, even if you're not intending to go to SharePoint immediately, is something that you can put in place to get that grounding set up ready for when you do start. And there's some other things that you also get out of the SharePoint environment as well that you were looking for as key deliverables.
Yeah, so what it means for us is a web-based site for communicating news, events, discussions and key faculty events. Easy searchable document libraries with personalised views, supporting efficient work practice and collaboration. Automation of business processes and a new way to discover information by browsing, filtering and searching. We envisage this exciting functionality will promote a new way of working for our staff.
So one of the first things I did when I came on the project is to break up what looked like a very large piece of work into smaller chunks that we could address, because there was a lot of areas that we needed to look at, both in terms of how we were going to organise, store the information, how we're going to implement records management, as well as the individual requirements of the faculty, so those news and events and processes. So we divided it up into these essentially 4 layers and a wider AUT approach. So first of all, there were some foundation pieces to put in, so the basic environment. And one of the things we also thought about early on was internet access to it as well. So if you saw Lou's presentation yesterday, it talks about mobile. It was kind of one of the things we thought about early on is, you know, who should have access to this SharePoint environment and from what devices and where. And the faculty has a lot of iPads, actually. So we needed to make sure they could access it from an iPad. So it had to be device agnostic, work in different ways. The other thing we put in place as well was from an authentication perspective, we hooked it up to Active Directory services, so we could actually authenticate against Facebook and Google if we wanted to in the future to provide maybe student access or something like that. So it's kind of thinking about where we're going eventually, and let's build the environment now that's appropriate, rather than have to come back and retrofit that kind of stuff later on. So it's all there set up, even though we've only deployed one faculty to date, it's ready to actually take on a wider piece of workload. We also looked heavily at governance, so we had to put in some documents around how we were going to actually govern this environment. So they're partly sort of SharePoint governance, but it's even things like how were we going to connect to the student record details or the course details. So we knew that potentially we're going to have processes that sit inside the environment where somebody's going to fill a form in and they're going to want to pick off the course on the module or whatever it is. But that data exists in a completely different system. So some things we thought about early on is how do we connect all these systems together? What is going to be the process when we do actually get round to it? So we come up with, we use just external content types and this inside SharePoint to connect to back-end data. There's a services layer that AUT already have that connects to their Arian student management system. So we built that in as the way that SharePoint connects up. So think about when you're putting this foundation in, not just potentially what you need for this pilot, but beyond that as to what the overall picture is going to look like. The next layer up, this IA, so the information architecture, we had to think about the overall site structure. So we could have just looked at just the faculty and then worked out what they needed. But we needed to say, well, how does that faculty fit with the wider AUT? So if you're going to browse to AUT's intranet homepage, how do you get to a faculty site? What does that top level look like, even though we're kind of siloed down in this box in a corner? And also there were some things that cross over. So there was some teams that were shared. So, you know, ICT services is a shared environment as well. So there's potentially not just a faculty. We don't have to just repeat that. We've also got teams, and then we've also got projects and so on. And then we had to think about how records management will fit with that as well. So The site structure also had to enable records to be able to be monitored and controlled. So that was always in the back of our minds as to how that's actually going to work in the future, and we were trying different ways of actually putting in the rules and things in Record Point to enable that. Then we started getting into what we call faculty foundation. So the idea here is every faculty would have these things. So when we go to the next faculty, they kind of get a template that's, here's your base faculty site. This is what you're going to get to start off with. And then from that, you can extend out based on the rules that we've put in place around how that happens. So there was the things that Shelley mentioned, so news and announcements and discussions and centralized document libraries and search. And then above that, we have the things that business and law needed. And these are really the killer things that were, you know, we need to put these in because this will make people go to the site. The rest of it's useful. It addresses a bunch of issues that we currently have, certainly around communication. But it's the top piece with the automation around processes that really sort of drive people to go to the site and start using it as well. And then we're going to take this whole thing and put it AUT wide. So even though we were looking at specifics for the faculty, we had to say, well, this is something that every faculty does, or lots of parts of the organized AUT are going to need in the future. And we kind of had to say, well, those should sit in an AUT-wide function and not be something that we deliver as part of this project, right? So just some examples like the IT request, you know, hardware request form, or leave forms, that sort of thing, were more AUT-wide. So we said, well, we should probably address those in the future phase. So I'll take this one. So there was a number of people involved in the project. So if we give you an idea, if you're going to set up a project at this sort of scale, the sort of people that you need to get involved. I broke this down into these 7 sort of bubbles of people you're going to need. So these are more kind of skills based, I guess. So we got SharePoint specialists, records management area. You need to have someone who's looking after that piece. Project management, definitely. There was the business group itself, so that was, in this case, the faculty. ICT were involved early on in the piece as well. We had subject matter experts, so these were people more involved with the processes, but also people that understood the documents. You know, somebody that understands those 732,000 documents and what they really mean. And then change management was also key. So these are the kind of the main areas that you're going to need to focus on in terms of roles. So pulling out of that, just to give you an idea of who's kind of filling those. So from a consultant perspective, that was myself. And Stephen was fulfilling the architect role from an AUT side. In terms of records management, we had a records advisor from Nowhere, Trish, I can't remember her name. Trish Kane. And then we also had the records manager at AUT, involved right from the beginning in this project. Project management wise, we had both a PM that was on the project full time, as well as governance came out of that project management. So we're talking about project governance rather than SharePoint governance. And Stephen has some slides on how that project governance was managed. From the business group perspective, there were 2 roles here. So there was Shelley as the owner, but we also had the comms communicator coordinator, who was responsible for publishing content. She's actually in the room today. You need to put your hand up, Michelle. Then from an ICT perspective, we had developers at AUT as well as at Provoke working on this project. We had infrastructure involved, and then we also had support involved. So we made sure support were involved from the beginning because they were going to have to support this at the end. So it was a good idea that they actually understood what we were actually deploying and how it's actually going to work. Subject matter experts, so there were people that owned content and people that owned processes. And then from a change management, we had somebody to help us write user guides, which was Debbie Island, actually came in and helped out with that whole process. So there's some specific user guides for people. We had our user adoption consultant, who was Michael Sampson, who kindly came in and helped out there. And then we also had a comms consultant on board. And that was just general change management communication. And we also got a specific slide on that. So you can see there's a lot of people involved in this project. And we regularly met weekly, and we kind of went around as to what each of us was doing and how things were going. So that would be like an hour meeting once a week, as well as other catch-ups that we had along the way. But it's a mix of people from AUT and other vendors. So where you don't have a skill, or you have a skill gap somewhere in this list, I suggest that you find external providers that can fill those gaps for you, so you can make a fully rounded team to be able to deliver this type of solution. Right, in terms of the development process, I'll just carry on. So Shelley also just talked about this a little while ago, about being involved in all of the workshops. So we initially started with a workshop to be able to start what we call gather requirements. But these were actually kind of show people what the potential could be. So we actually started to introduce, well, this is how SharePoint does these things, because we always find that people don't know what's possible. They're kind of used to what they've got today, and it's very hard to just say, well, what do you want? Because their frame of reference is too small. So we have to introduce, well, this is potentially what you could do. You know, what are the things that you think are key to AUT that we want to deliver? The requirements that we gathered, we then actually organized those into what was important, and we started creating mock-ups. So these were like some wireframe designs, but some actual prototypes in SharePoint to say, this thing you're asking for, this community discussion thing, this is how it would work if we just implemented it out of the box in SharePoint. So people very early on got an idea of how things could work, rather than waiting to the end and saying, well, here's your discussion forum, how do you like it? We identified then those quick wins. So those were the things that were the processes that we thought people would want to go to the site to engage with. We then went through a round to actually say, well, out of the wireframes, what phases do we want to deliver first, and then have we met all the requirements? And we cross-referenced wireframes of all of the requirements to make sure we've met each of them with something that's going to be actually built in the site. And then the implementation that we divided it up into, we're going to talk about the first phase that we've deployed, but there's actually a wider plan that covers everything that we're actually going to do in the future that Stephen's going to talk to later.
So, change management activities. So change management on this project, I think it's been a really interesting process, and to be honest, I think it's one where we've really second-guessed ourselves along the way. So there was a definite understanding that we needed change management on the as part of the program, and in fact the tagline on the faculty was changing the way we work. So we had a number of people on the project team involved in change management, as well as Alan's just said, bringing Debbie Ireland in to help with training material. And then in the later stages of phase one, we've just started engaging with Michael Sampson. And in fact, it was, yeah, I guess we've second guessed ourselves, I think, with our change management program. And it was only actually when we sat down with Michael and listed out all the different activities we'd actually engaged in, that we realised just how comprehensive the list actually is. And another consideration that Alan's just mentioned is project governance.
Right.
So
tell us about project governance, Stephen.
Shall I do that? So there were groups created very early on in the project to help ensure that the project met its expectations in terms of governance. So 4 groups were identified, and 3 of these are currently in operation today. So we have the SharePoint governance group, and that group is responsible for ensuring that the scope, policy and budget of the program of work are in line with the project initiation document. And the members of this team are largely representatives of senior management across the university. The second group is the steering committee, and that's chaired by an academic representative from the faculty, and they're responsible for ensuring that the intranet, the faculty intranet is built according to expectations, and also that the foundation is in place. And the last group is the project team, and that's obviously made up of the people who sort of work on the project on a day-to-day basis, and we meet weekly.
So there were a number of products that we included in this. So there was gaps in what SharePoint could do. So we didn't pick essentially the products that we would use right at the beginning of the project. We identified the requirements and when we needed to deliver it, and then looked at what the gaps were in SharePoint. We already knew there was a gap with records management. So Record Point was kind of high on the list to start off with. But there were a number of other products that kind of came along later on as we started discovering things that we wanted to be able to do, and we needed to be able to make those easier for the users of SharePoint. Office is an interesting one because we looked at earlier on, you were using Office like 2010 at the time, and there were some things in 2013 that would just make things easier to use with SharePoint, especially the way you go to the save menu and you can pin things on there that you're using, and the fact that it's sort of highlighted that SharePoint is the first place to save things and your hard drive and other stuff is like right at the bottom. So there were some advantages we used in Office 2013 that we then said, well, this should be part of the project, and we aligned an ICT project to deliver the new version of Office and link onto desktops with the project delivery at the same time. Now that was a lot of change potentially to do at one time, but the advantages of actually having the 2013 products all aligned with SharePoint was probably a lot greater than sticking with 2010 and trying to go live with that on that basis. So consider Office as part of the products and the whole package. So from a records management, Record Point is the product that we've got in place. So that's managing both physical records and electronic records. And we did a number of training sessions around Record Point with the records manager, so who's familiar with the product, as well as working with Record Point themselves to work out what the best way of doing rules are and working out dispositions and all that sort of stuff. Also Trish helped with understanding how PRA compliance could be applied with Record Point. So having that external view of, this is how you need to be compliant, and this is how that's delivered through Record Point, and then kind of matching those up. We brought on Nintex to actually help with automating the processes. So just to be able to enable the faculty in the future to be able to create their own workflows, but also because it gave us a lot of reporting and easy management of that overall process. The ones that we looked at are the travel request form, and the other one is what they call an AQ2, which is actually a paper change. So if there's a change to the description of a paper, they fill that in, and it pulls in data from the back-end system, and then the whole process flows through to actually getting those changes approved to the paper, and then they go off to the meeting to actually finalize those. We looked at Pingar kind of halfway through as we were doing analysis of content. So we started with a spreadsheet approach to documenting. Shelley normally we kind of go in and say, well, can you just document kind of the sort of documents you've got and how they might be tagged or used? But given there were 732,000 odd kind of documents, it wasn't really working that effectively. So just line by line going, oh, we have these reports and we have these paper descriptors, etc. Just wasn't providing the sort of information we needed. So what we did is we actually brought Pingar in, and they had a new tool called a taxonomy generator, and we run that across the file. We run that across the sample of the file system. I think we took 50 gig of it or something like that, and they analyzed 50 gig of the file system and said, this is the sort of stuff that you've got. And then we worked with them to be able to produce a spreadsheet that then categorized it and gave us keywords. And really what that helped us do is more kind of work out what is the stuff that you have and how do we want to organize that, rather than we didn't actually use their taxonomy that it generated, but it gave us a picture of what it looked like. So it was really useful to get that feel for everything that was in the file storage. And going forwards, there's a potential that we use that against other faculties before we actually start to find out what sort of content they have. And we're expecting there'll probably be some sort of alignment over time. As each faculty comes on, they might learn there's some more stuff generated, but then they'll all have roughly the same taxonomy going forwards. We also, we did look at AvePoint early on in the project, but discounted it because there was nothing in particular that we needed at the time. But now it's actually deployed. There's a number of things that we were looking to put in place. Reporting and probably security auditing are high. So there's some content in there going forwards that needs to be security controlled, and we need to make sure who has access to it and be able to control those permissions. So we're looking at AvePoint to help us deliver those. And you guys brought on the SharePoint Shepherd Guide, which is it's actually a site collection that you can buy, and it's all built as a wiki, and it just provides a kind of step-by-step of how to use SharePoint, just its basic functions. and it actually sits in the SharePoint site. But you can go in and then customize it. So it has some videos, and you can replace some content with your content. So it created this online help solution that was we found really useful. Okay, so balancing records management and user experience. So at Provoke, we're very much focused on the end user experience and what it's like to use SharePoint and trying to make it better. So if you saw Lou's session yesterday, he'd done a lot of work around how to create specific apps for people to do different tasks. You know, remove this left-hand navigation thing and create some big buttons of stuff that you need to do. And that's making the user experience better. But as soon as you start adding records management and you ask somebody to fill in 7 tags when they drop something in a document library, it isn't going to work. Right? So we needed a way to make it seamless for the end user, but at the same time there was a very strong records management compliancy going on underneath. And the way I like to visualize this is kind of like this iceberg effect. Right? So from an end user perspective, all they can see is this very nice top layer above the water. It's working exactly as they need it to. They have their document libraries and lists as normal inside of SharePoint. They can have document templates. There's search built in, and there's views based on who you are. And they're just unaware of any records management whatsoever. Right? So this was the aim that we wanted to get to. We didn't want them to have to pre-fill in a bunch of metadata tags to say it's this business classification, it's this confidentiality, or whatever else it was. To be able to make it a record. We actually wanted to make it as seamless as possible. So underneath this, this iceberg, of course, is what the records manager sees. Right? So the records manager has an area that he goes to in Record Point, and he can see all of the documents across the whole of SharePoint, and he can see how they're classified or otherwise. So he gets a view of everything that's not yet classified, and he'll go in and actually classify those up, whether it's creating a rule that then identifies that this piece of content is this classification, and then the outcomes that apply to it in terms of how long it needs to be kept. So this means that the records manager gets what they need, and the end user gets a very nice front-end SharePoint environment to work with at the end of the day. So we had to do a lot of work defining content types and metadata. We had a number of attempts at this, I think it's safe to say. So don't assume you'll get it right first time. We didn't. And we tried it in different ways. And we had to, of course, align this with Record Point. So we had to say, well, we're going to need to define a content type at this level so that Record Point rules can be applied. And Stephen did a lot of work on this. So I hand back to you, Stephen.
Thanks. Yeah, as Alan said, the objective really was to provide a simple user experience for the end users and to meet our Record Point sort of requirements. So we had a number of different options for classifying our content, and the first was to use Pinger. We decided, mostly just due to the, relatively small volume of content we were going to migrate as part of phase 1, to just do an audit and classification, take an audit and classification approach as we went. The second was to take what's called the GDA, the General Disposal Authority, and use that as a starting point for our classification. So one of the considerations here is that the GDA is more sort of record management focused, and that users sort of found it quite hard to understand what that classification meant for them. The third option was the business classification scheme. So the BCS classifies content based on function and activity. And we did some user testing in the early stages with Shelley and her team, and again we found that they had a lot of trouble classifying content according to the BCS. The fourth option was to actually just go ahead and use a classification scheme which was meaningful to the end user. But one of the problems that we sort of identified as a result of doing that was that our record management rules were going to become very, very complex. So what we ended up doing is taking a hybrid approach of content type buckets and a user-centric classification scheme. So here's an example of our content classification. So we've designed these high-level content types. Oops. So we've defined these high-level content types, which are based on a rolled-up GDA classification. So in this example, you can see that we have the content type of informative content. So, and it's at this level that we apply our record management rules. Hanging off our informative content, we have AUT guides, AUT handbooks, FAQs, and fact sheets. So that's the level at which the user interacts with the content. So they'll go into a document library. They'll say they're working with a FAQ document. But what actually happens in the background is that Record Point picks up the fact that that's informative content and applies the appropriate retention policies to it.
Yeah, one of the things we wanted to avoid is that users have to go to a library and pick from 10 or 15 content types when they publish something. So we try to keep it as simple as possible from an end user perspective. And then where possible, if you're going to an FAQ list, it's already the FAQ, so they don't even need to pick a content type. So as much as possible, defaulting both content types and metadata where we can, so the user doesn't have to actually send any of that. They just put the document in the right place. We just need to teach them where to put it.
Yeah. And when it comes to our collaboration workspaces, we'll start using sort of location of the actual site itself plus some additional metadata to inform our classification.
Yeah.
So what did we deploy?
Yeah, what did you deploy first? Oh, and why?
And why?
Yeah.
So we took a phased approach through the program. So phase 1 comprises of the intranet foundation that will be rolling out to other parts of the university. So that, as we've said before, comprises of a toolkit which contains faculty documents, discussions, news and events. Phase 2 is the creation of those collaboration and department sites. And phase 3 will be the rollout of the Intranet Foundation across the university, as well as continuing to work with the faculties and departments that we've already deployed to, and continuously sort of enhancing what we've deployed to them. So Shelley, do you want to tell us what your intranet looks like?
So this is our faculty's homepage. It publishes all our announcements from all areas of the faculty, the latest internal news, discussions, and a faculty calendar that shows academic meeting dates and deadlines. Down the left-hand navigation are the department and office sites you see there. They are the department sites that are currently being developed, and on the right-hand side is the My Stuff control, which is a mixture of customisation and out-of-the-box functionality. This can be personalised with links and other roll-ups from within the site. So this is a toolkit, which is a repository for our centralised faculty documents, including protocols, templates, guidelines, and any other key pieces of information. It can be easily filtered by document type, contact person, business activity, and has a customised search, which was created just for this library. We created 4 specific discussion boards to support staff in using this functionality. The How Do I one, which is shown here on the right, is an area for staff to ask for help and learn from others. We purposely set up a special discussion titled Our Intranet on here to gather feedback from users on the site, which is moderated within the faculty and responses posted as soon as possible to promote engagement. The water cooler board is an area for discussions relating to staff and their work. The other discussion is for staff who have got something to say, but they just don't know where to say it. And social, which is kind of new to the faculty, is for non-work related discussions. So how did we launch it? The first phase launch, staff are invited to attend a quick session with a very short presentation on the hour for a full day. There's a bit of a chocolate bribe if they attended as well. Members of the project team and clearly identifiable blue t-shirts were available in the room and also walked the office floors, engaging with staff and promoting awareness of the launch. Staff had a short quiz to work through, which provided them with an overview of the site's foundation and functionality, along with the chocolates that took away a branded pen and a small information leaflet on navigation, help and link. There's a good turnout of staff throughout the day. Floor walkers continued to walk the floors to support staff for the remainder of the week and to answer any questions they may have. We also attended department meetings and provided one-on-one training to some more senior management faculty members.
So Stephen, or Shelley?
Me.
Oh, Shelley, what's
me.
coming next?
So, what's coming next? Okay, we have 2 workflows currently in development that we've chosen for a variety of reasons, but primarily because of the current process is a real pain point for staff, and automating them should provide the project with a quick one. Department and office sites will allow groups of staff to work together on teaching, projects, research and other collaborations, and each site can be developed to support its own particular needs. They would also likely have an intranet presence with news, announcements and discussion boards.
So this is the roadmap of the rollout of the IMC program across the university. So you'll see we sort of have 3 phases going. The top level is that intranet foundation rollout across the faculties and departments. So we've rolled out to faculty in law, and we have 3 other faculties and departments. Their sites have been built at the moment. The idea is that as we roll those out, we'll also continue to work with faculty in law in sort of creating those collaboration work sites to help support business activities. And then we're also going to have this 3rd stream, which is actually the creation of sites to support projects across the university.
One thing probably to note here is that instead there's a stream for content types and site templates. So we haven't actually defined the entire taxonomy for everything to start off with. We're actually doing a just-in-time approach. So rather than saying what are all the possible things we could create for projects without even knowing what we're going to do with projects yet, was just too much effort that would just be wasted up front. So we're actually doing, let's define what projects need from a document content type perspective and how records apply to those, and then just do that just before we actually start implementing project sites, right? So rather than trying to boil the ocean to start off with, just kind of start with what you need and then expand out over time with your content types. It's just a case of getting the model right at that top level and keeping it simple to start off with and then just expanding down from there. So how we migrate existing content? So the sort of question is, well, how do we get this 700 or document 700,000 into SharePoint? So here's some of the statistics that Stephen gave you earlier. One thing to note is there's also, potentially there was some duplication. Also, the faculty though had worked on actually organising this content up front. So that's a reasonably well structured file system at this point that you're looking at, but that was a re-engineered structure of the file system. So we actually created an area in the file system where this is the structure that it should be, and then moved the content into the right places and identified what was key. So we didn't move it into, do it when we moved it into SharePoint, we did it beforehand. The other thing is there's a bunch of documents we haven't moved in, right? And the plan says that anything that needs to be records management should actually be in SharePoint, because that is the records management system, which means over time we do need to move everything off of the file system into SharePoint into some area. So as we get round for each thing, departments and teams and projects will start addressing different chunks of this file system. Right? So we just went for what are the key top documents that everyone needs to use on a daily basis, and those are the ones we tackle first, and then we're going to look at the other ones as we go through. So the migration is a gradual migration. This isn't tomorrow we're going to switch off the file system and you're using SharePoint, right? But for all of these documents, they now just exist in SharePoint, right? So anything that we've moved over, we have actually moved it over, right? So it doesn't exist in 2 places. The other options we had were possibly indexing the file system and leaving it as an archive. That still is an option to going forwards rather than moving old redundant content into SharePoint, but it depends on its records management level of recording, or whatever we want to call it. So it depends on how important that document is. If it must be records managed, then we'll move it into SharePoint and records manage it. If it doesn't necessarily fit that criteria, we'll potentially leave it on the file system and index it, right? So we're not saying everything has to go across. It's more a case of how important it is to the organisation as to whether we move it or not. There was some other thing on this that I forgot to mention, Shelley. You said yesterday.
This is just one of around 16 faculty directorates within the university. So you could imagine the size of the problem university-wide. So how do we do it? Well, subject matter experts within the faculty manually migrated the documents into the faculty toolkit from the shared drive. This approach worked, but it required a fair bit of training, remembering that this was these people's first look and contact with the site. And there's been a tidy up post-migration of all the metadata fields. Future migration of the entire shared drive will happen, as Alan said, as collaboration and department sites are created as part of the roadmap. We hope this promotes staff engagement and also ensures what needs to be in there is.
So there were some major challenges along the way on this project, as you probably expect, so we thought we'd share some of those with you as well. So these are the things that we really had to spend some time addressing. So we thought we'd share those with you because you're probably going to come across the same challenges, so we'd share what our thoughts were on how we actually tackled these.
So the first one is that there are no New Zealand reference points to work from. So I think all the universities across New Zealand are currently working on the building an intranet for comms and document management and discussions, etc., but none of us have actually completed the task. So I guess we're all faced with this scenario of having to work it out as we go, as opposed to having a working example that we can work off.
I think the second one everyone knows anyway, that SharePoint isn't the same as any other environment, but particularly with this one, because we also needed to address records management at the same time. It wasn't just the usual case of thinking about what do we need to deliver to the business, what do they need SharePoint to do for them. There was also how we're then going to make sure we can manage it as a proper record as well, and how do we then really address the content type model. It wasn't we couldn't just put in an out of the box team site and hope that worked, and we really had to think about it up front quite a lot before we started. So yeah, definitely not a ICT deploy SharePoint type project.
The third one, getting decisions made quickly. Due to its size and internal red tape, nothing much at AUT gets done quickly. This project to date has taken around 3 years.
The next one is no university information management policy. So what that means is that there's no guidance, no formal guidance across the university for the example where our authoritative content lives. So we have to, invoices are obviously a relatively good example. But they need to live in an finance system, but that's not documented. And also where media files and images and copyright. So none of that's been documented across the university. The next one is complexity of the overall solution. So, as you all know, SharePoint is a application which enables users to sort of build websites and add functionality in quite an agile way. I guess if you throw in sort of counterbalance that with the formality and the structure of putting in place a record management solution, I guess you end up with a lot of, conflicting approaches. And the last one is meeting the expectations. So that's probably one challenge, I think, for us moving forward. So we've been able to spend quite a lot of time working with the Business of Faculty and Law on this project. And as a result of that, I think they now have a much better understanding of SharePoint and how it works. And we have a much better understanding of how the faculty works. And as a result of that, for example, the design of our team sites and department sites are a lot different than now than they were a year ago. So the challenge for us is going to be moving forward, how we sort of ensure that we have that shared understanding between the different parties.
And there were also some positives that came out of this that we didn't quite expect at the beginning, and some we did.
Having many users editing a single document in real time, but in varied locations. Improving the ability of staff being able to find documents quickly and accurately. Discussion boards have removed the hierarchy of conversation flow and it's a safe environment for everybody in the faculty to comment. Over half the faculty, 2 days post-launch, had created their My Sites and interacted with the site, and people are really excited about what's coming next.
And what was unexpected, Shirley? Stephen.
Unexpected. So the first one is Link. So Link, as Alan said, we rolled out 2013. As a part of that, Link was deployed, and users really love instant messaging. They just jump straight on board. And also the integration between Link and SharePoint, we got a real sort of wow factor back from users about that. Another unexpected outcome was actually My Site. So it was interesting. As Shelley said, we've been working on this project for about 3 years, and as sort of defining requirements and doing our planning and building, etc., etc. And as part of the project, we obviously decided to roll out My Sites. And of course, My Sites, there's a huge amount of functionality that comes out with them. I guess the only thing I would say is just consider that as part of your change management plan.
Yep. So our top tips. So really, if you take anything away from this session, these are the things that you probably want to note down as our top tips if you're about to embark on this size project involving records management as well. These are the things you should definitely think about.
So the first one I would say is have your record manager as part of the project. And the reason I say that is we mentioned earlier, record managers sort of come from a very different place than people who typically deploy SharePoint projects. And David Pride, our record manager, and I, we meet regularly and we argue regularly. And I think one of the great things about those arguments that we have is that we're sort of working out our differences as we go, and we haven't had any impasses. So there's been no actual sort of standoffs that have sort of stopped us moving forward.
Ensure that the business area has an advocate to keep the project moving, promote engagement within the faculty, ensure the business requirements are being met. So that's the role that I undertook in the project.
Yeah. So mine is taking a more strategic approach. So just have that long-term vision roadmap of where you're actually going, which will affect everything that you plan for. So even though we started with just a pilot of just the faculty, we always had our mind on the bigger picture, what that looked like. It just ensures we don't end up down in any rat holes that we need to solve later on because we've put the wrong type of metadata or content type model in place. So start small, but think big. Okay.
Don't underestimate the scope of the project. As we've said a couple of times, this thing's been running for almost 3 years. And as part of that, we've had to create a whole lot of sort of supporting, infrastructure, documentation. We've got volume metrics, we've got change management plans, we've had design documents, etc. So I guess heading into a project like this, understanding the size of it, of what you're about to embark on. The other one is understanding the complexity of your environment. So AUT is a very large, complex environment. It's very siloed, has various stakeholders from staff to allied staff, from managed student services through to AUT Council. And then you chuck in the difference between a potentially agile SharePoint deployment and records management. You have a very complex environment to be working in. I think one of the good things we did, we take the approach of implementing something, evaluating how people worked with it, deciding whether it's successful or not, and then confirming from there what we would deliver next. And so far, I guess that sort of iterative feedback loop has produced some very positive responses from our users. And the last one is prioritise change management. So, as I mentioned earlier, the tagline for this project is changing the way we work. We aren't just deploying a new piece of technology, we're asking people to change the way they interact with content and adopt a completely new way. And it seems only fair that we work with them over this transition to set them up to succeed.
Yep. Thanks. So that concludes our questions that we had that we thought you might ask us. But there's obviously maybe some other questions that have come up whilst you've been watching us talk about a few. So what we're going to do is we'll go around and take the questions, and we have some books to give out. So if you do ask a question, then we'll, Shelley's actually going to deliver the books for us. That's great. Right, let's start. I think you guys over there, put your hands up first. Yeah, you. All right, so the question is, how do we go about packaging the content types and deploying them? We take a two-pronged approach to this. So at the very high level, they are a solution package that's deployed, and we deploy it to the content type hub plus to each faculty. There's a technical reason for that I'll cover later on out of this. But so the top ones are, but we're going to allow people to then inherit down from those. So the records manager doesn't have to go in and change this solution package to inherit from informative content, for instance. Right? So we've said this is the level that's defined as a package, because we need those in place because they have to be there for a records management perspective. But everything underneath, you can add extra ones and inherit. Yeah, in the content type hub, so it actually pushes it out. Yes. So it did initially because we thought we defined the content types and that's what we built. And then when we deployed it, we changed their mind. And because this iterative process of let's do something and then see what happens means that something happens and you need to change. So it did mean we had to do updates to content types and things. But we started with we have a dev UAT and a production environment, and we spent a lot of time in UAT getting that right, and we didn't deploy anything to production until it was ready to go. Yeah. Woman in the red. Okay, so the question is, why did we use discussion boards in SharePoint as opposed to Yammer? Let me see. So we did talk about Yammer. There were some licensing challenges at the moment, which are actually going away from a tertiary education environment. But the thing we found that was better with discussions is this ability to do the question and reply, and the fact that they're actually sort of sticky. So if you have a Yammer conversation, it's going to disappear, you know, after about the 10th one, and then no one ever bothers scrolling down the first 2 pages to see it. And the search is not very good, right? It's probably a description for it. It's going to get better, but it's not very good at the moment. Whereas the discussion board had this ability to say, you know, here's a question. We had a moderator. They could go in and answer it. You could see who were the people who were answering the most questions. So it's a much better tool for having that kind of FAQ type approach to a discussion, as opposed to a free form trying to formulate some ideas and that sort of thing. Does that answer your question? Yeah. I think there's something down the front here. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, with the 700,000 documents, how do we encourage people to use SharePoint as opposed to use the file system going forwards? And Stephen, I think this is one for you.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, we're working with individual groups of users and identifying their needs, that we ended up with something we could sort of work with. So 700,000 documents is a nightmare, but working with 700 documents is much more manageable. So we were working with initially anyway, working with small teams of people. I guess in terms of the toolkit, that was sort of directed at the faculty level. So there was some sort of direction from management in terms of the fact that it had to happen. We're working with academics right now on the creation of document workspaces to support their collaboration. And to be honest with you, when you look at their pain points, for example, sharing documents, no versioning, etc., and you show them just the simple document library with that out of the box functionality, they want to use it.
Yeah. And I think Shelley also mentioned it, the multi-user editing and the things that people suddenly think, oh, well, that's great. You know, why didn't I have this in the past? And I think they start to see, but they kind of got to use it to then realize that that's the great thing about it. It's hard to sell the benefits to them necessarily up front. You can show them, but until they start using it, they don't really visualize it. Go at the front.
How did you align your electronic taxonomy with your paper records?
So that's an easy answer, and that is paper records are out of scope of this project.
Yeah. They're not out of scope of the capability of the solution. We just haven't done it yet. But yeah, we will put that in place. Because it is sitting within Record Point, we still have access to the same managed metadata, so the whole taxonomy we have built can be reused. We just haven't got around to tackling how that works. But currently, it is actually stored in a number of spreadsheets, and we can just take the whole spreadsheet and import it. So even if we just take it as is, it'll still be better than where it is at the moment. Right? So that's the plan. Anyone else? So do we have any data on how many people are using ShareDrive as opposed to using SharePoint?
No, we don't. So all we've migrated to date is the faculty-wide documents. So those documents don't exist on the file share anymore, they're gone. And so if they want, so that's, as I said, our fact sheets, our templates, etc. So if they want to use those documents, they have to go to the intranet to use them. But I haven't. No, we don't. I guess I don't know if I understand the question, but I mean the content that's been migrated is solely accessible from the intranet.
Yeah. And so going forward, I think as we do teams and departments, that is going to become more key, because that's when they start doing their day-to-day activities are expected to be done in SharePoint. No, because they're not doing document creation type processes per se at the moment. Yes. And if it is there, it's read-only. But it's definitely moved. Yeah, let's go over there to the one. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we really have to turn off file shares? Is the question.
No. But what I would do is I'd stop using the file share you have. So, So I would move it to specific areas. So the way I've done it before is, so working for an engineering company, and they have project sites in SharePoint. There's a lot of just Word documents and things like that sit in there, but then they have drawings. So what do we do with the drawings, right? So instead of using the file system as they had it today, which was a mishmash of structure, we actually align the structure with SharePoint. So the IA of SharePoint is the same as the IA of the file system. So you can kind of go project here, and then in the file system, we actually monitor if there's different types of files that we're not expecting to be in there, using the capability of the SAN structure thing. Right? So we say, these are the types of files you should put in the file system. Here's the ones in SharePoint. For their environment, we've just got a simple link at the moment. It just goes open here, and it opens in Explorer and opens the file system. Going forward, the plan was to use docav connector or something along those lines. Or you have to use File Navigator if you've got like really big files. There's no way around it. And I say don't put big files in SharePoint. Even like video files, if you saw at the keynote, he talked about that new video capability. None of those videos are stored in SharePoint. They're all actually stored in Azure, which is where it should be. Right? So yeah, don't put everything in SharePoint. Not everything makes sense. I think the plan eventually is yes, because we don't want to stifle that kind of innovation type thing, but we need to monitor when it's done. So the idea is to monitor when somebody creates a content type and monitor when they create a workflow, and then decide what we're going to do after that. But we're not going to prevent it, because then that just means people can't innovate. Right? So we will allow it, but they have to inherit from our content types. So don't inherit from document, don't inherit from some out-of-the-box list thing. You have to inherit from our content types.
Does your template work when you create a subsite or record rules and everything else?
No.
Are you allowed subsites?
No, because we do it by location. Yeah, so not at the moment, but we've got a plan for that when we do teams. Yeah. Yes, go in front.
My question is about sharing.
No.
At this stage, no.
I don't think so. So the problem with sharing is that any individual could potentially share a document. One thing to note is that you can still have somebody that manages security, so you don't have to have security rights to share something. And what happens, it goes to somebody who's managing that site who then needs to approve the sharing. I think that would be the way that we would address that, because it needs to be, whoever's managing a site needs to be aware of records management and other rules and the security of the site, because they're responsible for it. So rather than just allowing people to share content, it should really go through someone to actually approve that. Yeah, my site's on OneDrive, a bit more tricky, but we've sort of got a bit of a program around communicating what you're meant to use your OneDrive for and what you're not meant to use it for. But monitoring is definitely something you have to put in place as well to manage security, and that's where the AppPoint security admin was coming into it, to be able to run that across and check. Yeah. We're going to take one more question, I think, because I think we're due to finish. Yes, down the front. So the question is whether we had sort of guidance from the top, direction, or they were involved and support.
Like, yes, this is what we're going to do, this is the decision we've made, and we're going to forward with that.
Yeah.
Regardless of the academics and the other.
This is definitely for Shelley. Yeah.
And I was just going to ask, you said it will possibly project with Rollout. Did it? To what extent did it? Did you anticipate a year or a year and a half project for that 3? So you've got one department.
Yeah. We did a huge amount of planning up front. We did identify, so we did start very much siloed on the faculty, and then we took a decision about 6 months in and we went, no, actually we need a bigger picture here. So we kind of backtracked ourselves and started writing content management strategies, information management policies. So all that base documentation we realized we didn't really have. So we kind of stopped and started writing that stuff. And then we came back and went, right, now we're ready to do the faculty. Yeah. We could have started doing that background stuff. We potentially would have still been successful even if we hadn't done it. So it's really, it was a decision we made, and that's why it potentially delayed the project. But actually, in terms of the build, our build was like 6-7 weeks, something like that. So actually building something out of this whole project of 3 years, 6-7 weeks. Yeah. So the build development part of it is the smallest bit of this whole project. Yeah. Anyway, so we need to finish up, I think. So you can all have morning break. But we'll be out at the Connect zone for the next wee while. I'll be on the Provoke stand if you want to go grab me and ask me some other questions. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning up.